So hello everybody and welcome to our Advent podcast. My name is Reverend Ian Wallace.
And I'm Reverend Gail Thomas, and today we're going to be talking to you about Silent Night, the carol.
And how that relates to a couple of those very familiar Christmas readings from the prophet Isaiah, in Isaiah chapter 9 and Isaiah chapter 11, about the for unto us a child is born and the shoot growing from the stump of Jesse. Fabulous readings.
And then finally, we're going to talk about the carol, O Little Town of Bethlehem, and how that was written, and its very interesting backstory.
Sounds like a good one, doesn't it, Gail?
I enjoyed it. Oh.
Good. Well, we better get started then, hadn't we?
Oh, tidings of comfort and joy. Oh, tidings of comfort and joy.
Well, Gail, just a few minutes ago when we were chatting, you were telling me that you discovered something about the writing of Silent Night and how it came to be written. So do you want to just refresh my memory on that?
So there was a priest called Joseph Moore, I think it is, and he wrote it not long after the Napoleonic Wars had taken place. And the backstory is that he went for a walk before he wrote it, and he looked over a very quiet, winter-laden town, and he was inspired that the town was at peace. And so that really struck me, that actually in those dark times he was able to see that peace. In those dark times of war, he was able to see that light looking over the town. So that really struck me.
So I think they were dark days for the Austrian, so for Austria during the Napoleonic Wars. I think a lot of people died on the battlefield. So actually that's quite interesting, that because it's one of those carols that I really love. It just that when it starts up at the carol service, that sense of sort of peace and calm just spreads across the whole church as people sort of gradually pick up the tune and things. So it's the most beautiful carol, and of course it got sung in the trenches, I think.
That's right. And on the day when they had the truce called on Christmas Day, the story goes that everybody started singing Silent Night in their own language. So they were singing it in French and German and English all at the same time. So that gives me kind of a warm feeling, actually, that in the midst of all that terror and in the dirt of the trenches, there was that song, the carol was just kind of rising up as a voice of hope, if you like.
Yeah. In fact, I suspect it was the carol itself which led to the truce, because of course in Europe they celebrate Christmas, or very much starting on Christmas Eve, and that carol would have been sung on Christmas Eve night, and everybody joined in, which I think then led to them all getting together on Christmas Day and peace breaking out. I don't think the generals quite liked that, did they really? But it was banned in subsequent years. But the football game and everything that took place, and it all flowed from the singing of this carol and that sense of, God's, bringing peace into these very dark situations. And I suppose really that's what our readings, the readings from Isaiah, are all about, isn't it, really?
Yes, yeah, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. I mean, yes. In these dark times at the moment, when we're thinking about the coronavirus and how that's affected everybody, just being able to see that great light, to have that joy brought to us, it's just something special, isn't it?
I think it is, and I think in a sense it's brought this reading alive to me again this year, because I think we tend to sort of focus on, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. That's the bit that we all remember, and we forget that actually the reading starts in darkness. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. And we're doing this series, as you know, in 6:30 Praise around Isaiah. And I think one of the things that is coming through to me was actually that Isaiah was writing at really difficult times.
That's
You know,
right. But they were facing that Assyrian threat, weren't they?
That's
All
right.
the
It was war and conflict. The nation was being overrun. People were being taken off into exile. Everything was falling to bits for them. They were really dark times, and the sense of where is God in all of this. And then Isaiah speaks into it. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and that sense of sort of hope and anticipation that comes from it.
Yeah. And then we've got that next Isaiah reader, haven't we, about the shoot coming up from the stump of Jesse, about when they think that the stump of the tree has been cut down.
Yes.
And the roots have still got these nutrients in them, and this shoot comes off. So this new life breaks out of this really devastated tree, if you like. And that's again a wonderful image of this tiny glimmer of hope growing in what are really dark times for them.
Yes, and the sense that actually, God is bringing new life out of what otherwise seems dead and hopeless, and there is this, sense of a rebirth and energy and hope surging forward. Yes. And it then goes on to describe, if you like, the sort of almost the restoration of all things. The wolf will lie with the lamb, and the leopard will lie down with the goat. This sense of harmony in the natural world being restored. And of course, at this time when we're very conscious of the disharmony in the natural world, the destruction of rainforests, the destruction of our environment, the mass extinction of animal species. This sort of looks forward with that great hope to a sort of a restoration, bringing everything back to the way it should be.
And that's especially evident, I think, in the line which says, the infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put its hand into the viper's nest. If we think back to the creation story and how everything was perfect when the Lord created it, and then due to the fall, the snakes were put against humankind, so they were slithering on the ground, and yet here we see a child, a baby, playing with the snakes, because all is restored and everything is back to how it should be.
I agree, and for me, the person who first put together the service of 9 lessons and carols, it was a stroke of genius to start back in Genesis, with the creation story, that sort of and light coming through, and the way things were, because then actually these passages that come along link in with that and speak back into it, and speak of the God putting right what has been damaged and destroyed, and restoring it to the way that it should be.
And this thing about the Prince of Peace, who's going to bring out peace in everybody, so that when Jesus came as the Prince of Peace, he taught us how to lead peacefully, how to be with each other peacefully, and I think that sense of peace is really important, especially now at this time of year when everything's normally crazy, and this year it's crazy in a different way.
Yeah. Yes, I wonder how many of us go to carol services sort of almost thinking about them as restoring our sense of vision as to what God's purpose is, and restoring that sense of hope, and recognizing that in a sense it's what we're celebrating is more than just the birth of a child, but actually the birth of the one who is the Redeemer of the world, and is going to make all this restoration possible and in the future.
I don't know the answer to that, Ian, because I think that actually we do sometimes become a bit kind of blasé about the readings, because we've heard them so many times over and over. We don't actually always think about what they mean. And I think this year, more than ever, we are actually going back to the text, and we are going back and saying, gosh, I've heard that in there this year.
Yes, yes.
And certainly for me, the readings have become more alive, I think.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I will readily hold up my hand as one who is inclined to sort of be a bit blasé about the readings, and I think as well as the vicar, when you're just sort of sitting there sort of worrying that, you know, has the next person remembered they're supposed to be reading, and, you know, is this going right and is that going right with the service, which is always a danger when you're when you're leading a service. You know, you sit there trying to be calm, but you're thinking, now is everything going right? And yes, and these readings often, I think, can tend to sort of wash over you, and you think, oh yes, it's that one again, I remember that one. But we don't often get this opportunity to really sort of go back and think, actually, these texts are very profound. They're saying something important to us about, even in the really difficult times, and you know, these are difficult times, and you know, our Christmas is, we now know, is going to be disrupted. But even in the darkness, there is this light of hope that comes bursting through. And, you know, I think Isaiah's readings are totally extraordinary. I mean, I half wonder how his original hearers would have heard that prophecy about, you know, sort of, for unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. I mean, I suppose they probably just thought that that was going to be a sort of another King David might be born who will chase the enemy away and restore hope. But actually, what that prophecy is so much more than that, you know, and pointing to the Prince of Peace, you know, of his government and peace there will be no end.
But I think also because it doesn't say, oh, you Israelites, you're going to have a new king, a new child born in 10 years' time or next year, because it's undated. Yes. It means that we've got that assurance forevermore, because every time we read it, we've got that assurance, because it has no date on it. It just says the child will be born, he will be the Prince of Peace, he will bring peace on earth.
And of course, we can see now, I mean, you know, they do fit, that they do point to Jesus. You know, they fit so well with the celebration of Christmas and what that's all about, because that's really, you know, it's God speaking into the darkness saying, don't worry, I've got this under control. You know, there is a Redeemer who will be born, who will restore all things to the way that they should be.
And I think that's why it's really important at Christmas, not just to hear the stories from the New Testament, but to actually hear the backstory, to hear all the history behind it, and to understand that Jesus coming was such a long-awaited arrival, that people have been waiting for it for 700-800 years.
Yes.
And you know, and we are very impatient. We can't wait until next week to find out what's going on, whether we'll be allowed back into churches again or what. But they had to wait 800 years for the Messiah to arrive.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
He definitely was the long-awaited Jesus.
He was, yes, 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 yes. Which speaks to another carol, Come Thou Long Expected Jesus, but it's not the one that we're supposed to be talking about, is it?
I just slipped an extra carol in.
That's all right, that's okay. But we probably ought to just mention O Little Town of Bethlehem, oughtn't we? Because that's got quite an interesting story as well. It's that lovely carol.
Yes, so this again was written by another priest from the US, from Philadelphia. And he went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, and he was sitting up on the hillside at night, and he wrote this when he got back, but he remembers on Christmas Eve sitting on the hillside outside of Bethlehem, where there was an old church, and which was close to the spot where Jesus was said to be born, and the whole church was ringing out, the bells were ringing out hour after hour, and there was praise being sung hour after hour. And he was saying, oh, you know, he was just thinking about how they were telling again and again the story of that wonderful night, and which is why he says, oh, little town of Bethlehem, how still is he lie, and they're still ringing out and they're still proclaiming the holy birth all that time afterwards.
You know what I love about this carol
Go on.
and its backstory? It was originally written just as a poem, which I suppose gives hope for any of us who write poetry that maybe someday somebody will get hold of it and do something with it. But it was just a poem, and 3 years later, he sort of dug it out and handed it to his organist and said, "Can you do anything with this for the carol service?" You see, so. Carol service begins to loom. 24 hours before the carol service, there's still no music written for this carol. And apparently the organist went to bed on the Saturday night with nothing written. Carol service was on the Sunday, of course. So sounds a bit like some of my sermons. No, actually, that's not true. But anyway, he awoke in the middle of the night and described hearing this sort of angel strain, which he then wrote down and went back to sleep. And the following morning, before the service, just added in a few harmonies. And that's how we get the tune of "Oh Little Town of Bethlehem," which I just think is wonderful.
I feel sorry for the choir who have to sing it though.
Yes, exactly. Yes, sort of minimal time to rehearse it, but yes.
But how lovely to wake up in the night and hear angel voices singing that carol,
and I think yes. And the poem is, in a sense, a masterful piece of writing, because it talks about the specific place of the little town of Bethlehem, but set in the universe above the starry night. What's it? The silent stars go by. It sort of it gets this sense of the whole universe, but also of this specific place. And then within the dark streets, there shines the everlasting light. This sort of contrast between the small and the great, and the dark and the light is sort of woven into the poetry of the song. And I think that's masterful. And I love it when the organ strikes up, and it's quite a quiet carol, isn't it? But you just get this sort of sense of mystery sort of coming through the carol. So
and then of course the last verse is a prayer, isn't it, that we all take part in.
Yes.
So we're all drawn into that story.
Yes. Good. Oh well, I really enjoyed chatting with you about that, Gail, and actually it's sort of re-energized my thinking about these readings, and I shall be listening much more carefully this year as we go online for this carol service. Okay, thank you very much. It's been great chatting with you.
Oh, tidings of comfort.